Good afternoon, all. And this is a follow-up of the meeting that we had on June 2nd. United Montclair. Right. So again, the purpose of this is that we want the community to have an opportunity to listen and hear from each other. There's a lot of anger, a lot of concerns that's going on. And so the first meeting, there was like 400 people in the meeting, and there was tons of concerns and issues. We put all those issues together into 4 categories: body cams and police training, civilian review board, defunding of the police department, and the blue line flag and symbols. And so for what we're going to do today is, for the first half an hour, Chief Conforti and team, there were some questions that came off on June 2nd that were not asked or answered. And so for the first half an hour, what we really want to do is give the chief and team an opportunity to address and answer some of those questions. During this half an hour, there's no questions that we want in the chat room. We're going to just address that. And then immediately after that, everybody will be sent to a breakout room, the choice. As we were putting this together, we thought Zoom was going to be easier, but we've learned a lot. Mr. Scott is working very diligently on this. So what happens is people have been placed in rooms, and Zoom will automatically put people in rooms. If you're in a room that you don't want to really be in, you're able to leave that room and I believe select another room. And whether you're in one room or not, each room will be recorded, so you'll be able to hear what happened in the other rooms.
How many rooms are there?
So there's 4 rooms.
And what are they?
The rooms are body cams and police training, civilian review board, defunding of the police department, whatever that means, and the blue line flag and symbols. Those are the 4 breakout rooms. But I think it's important that for everybody to understand what we hear today is, conversations and thoughts. If something comes up where there's a need to create another breakout session, or a subcommittee, that's what we want to do. We want the public to hear and have the opportunity to get involved. So there's a lot of stuff that we need to be working on, but everybody has to be committed to want to be part of the process. Marcia, did you have any statements you want to open up with?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I want to thank everyone for being on this Zoom call, and especially Al and the NAACP for putting the concept and the necessary technology together. I also want to thank the Montclair Police Department and the Town Council for participating, and everyone on this call. Over the last several weeks, I've been wondering, is this time different? As you can tell, I am a senior citizen, and this is not my first go at police reform. While it isn't that we didn't achieve anything in the past, we did. It was just not enough, not nearly enough. But I believe we are at an inflection point where fundamental change is possible. This time, young people are remaining in the streets, New Wave and every other progressive organization I know stand with the Black Lives Movement, hopefully not just for the short term, but for the long haul. Structural change depends on a long-term commitment that includes continued dialogue, similar to what we're having today, but also constant advocacy to pass and implement the legislative and regulative changes that will rebuild the justice system. Effective reform will also depend on community engagement, oversight, and transparency. In other words, change depends on all of us. Today is devoted to answering your questions, either the questions that were submitted but not answered in our first meeting, or new questions that will be asked in the breakout sessions. So without further remarks from me, I turn this over to you, Al.
All right, so thank you, Marcia. Again, this is a joint effort. This is about the community having an opportunity to voice their opinions. So we should all be willing to listen and hear each other, which is extremely important. With that, Chief Conforti and team, do your thing.
Hey, Al, before I begin, just to let you know, this may run over a half hour because some of these questions are multiple parts. So I'm going to do my best to get through them.
Right. So let's attempt to, we want to stay committed to the time. So
I'm going to do my best. Yeah.
right. So get us close to that. And then if we have to do another session at another point in time, we will.
Okay. All right. So the first, you want me to read the question? Or you're going to read the question to me? You want me to
No,
read?
it's on you. This is your half an hour. You're wasting a minute already.
All right. Hey. All right. The first question: would like to know if the Montclair Police Department is trained in evidence-based de-escalation techniques? Yes, we are. Officers have participated in both virtual and in-person training on techniques and de-escalation, as well as the Essex County Prosecutor's Office will be providing further guidance in the future on both policy and training on de-escalation. All right, the second question. Policies are fine. How are you addressing racism? Can you make a regular publication of the statistics in town, broken down by race as the numbers followed? Detained, arrested, hurt by police. We review all the motor vehicle stops and have provided all the stop data for the Civil Rights Commission, who have not provided me with any negative feedback or concerns regarding the breakdown of our motor vehicle stops by race. The motor vehicle stop data will give you a better picture of what the officer is doing, since the stops are at the officer's discretion. Most other categories like arrests and people detained are driven by observations of witnesses and victims, and in most cases would not be a good representation of any differential treatment. Also, many arrests like domestic violence and warrant arrests, there's no discretion. For instance, in domestic violence, we have mandatory arrest situations, and many times arrests occur from warrants that were from another town, and the officer would have no idea of the race of the person. Also, someone may get a warrant from a parking ticket, and the officer never saw that person, but the person is shown that they have a warrant and they get arrested. Because of things like this, the data gets a little bit skewed. As far as the question on injured or hurt by the police, Captain O'Dowd is going to cover that later under the use of force information that was asked under NewJersey.com. Other areas that would address racism are the internal affairs process. Any racially motivated or differential treatment complaints would be investigated. We're also doing as much as we can to make the department more diverse. Lieutenant Williams is the recruiting officer. Since 2016, we have hired 23 officers, which included 10 black males, 2 Hispanic males, 1 Hispanic female, 1 white female, and 9 white males. Not counting the white female, you have 13 out of 23 minorities, mostly consisting of black males. Finally, Lieutenant Williams sits on the Civil Rights Commission and attends all scheduled meetings. I've spoken with them at the town hall and at police headquarters. And the one complaint that I remember having was making the department more diverse, and I feel that we are addressing that through the recruitment process that we're doing now. He's able to train the department on as well. The next question: what percentage of civilian initiated complaints of excessive force came by internal affairs? We had 2 within, again, there's no time frame on this, so we had 2 within the last 2 years. They were investigated by Captain O'Dowd and reviewed by the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. Excessive force complaint by the Prosecutor's Office. In both investigations, the level of force was justified in each situation. We take the complaint of excessive force very serious and investigate it thoroughly. The next question: I would be interested in knowing what percentage of arrests are Black citizens in comparison to town demographics. Again, this is covered by Captain O'Dowd when he goes over the use of force report provided by NewJersey.com, so we don't have to repeat ourselves. How are interdepartmental hires vetted? I'm basically going to go over quickly how we do the background investigations and what checks that we do. After the background is complete, myself and Will Young, Deputy Chief Young, review it after a supervisor reviews the background. But some of the checks we do to vet out departmental hires: we do home visits, we interview roommates, family, parents, siblings, interview current neighbors, former neighbors, current significant other, past relationships, references provided by the candidate. We go over all high school and college and trade school transcripts, military service records, past employers and co-workers. We check police records in towns and cities the candidates reside in or has resided in. We do warrant checks, criminal history, motor vehicle history, and expungement record checks. All candidates' credit history and financial records are checked. Records with police departments of college universities where the college candidate attended. We check the police academy records if they're an alternate route. Alternate route is someone who put themselves through the academy. We check other agencies' internal affairs file if it was a transfer from another department. And we check all community volunteer activities and social media sites. That's the basic checks that are done on the actual background. What percentage of Montclair police officers live in Montclair? 11%. The department is becoming more representative of the community it serves by waiving the requirement the applicant has to, let me just explain this. We changed the policy when we took over, myself and Deputy Chief Young, to get more diverse and to get more town residents. We waived the requirement they had to be in the academy and PTC trained. By doing that, the town has agreed, as long as they have the qualifications of 60 credits and or military like everyone else, that they will put them through the academy. Since doing that, we've been very successful at hiring town residents, and that's something that we're going to continue doing. And I'm proud of the number of town residents that we've interviewed and the ones that we've hired. Just recently, we're in the process of hiring 3 out of 4 candidates that are all town residents, but due to the COVID pandemic, we had to stop the backgrounds because the police academy shut down, and we had to cease with the background investigations at that point. But we are moving forward with continually making the department more diverse, as well as hiring town residents. How do you conduct background investigations and otherwise interview and investigate potential hires, screen out candidates with problematic racial attitudes or connections to white supremacist groups? Do you use polygraphs when asking candidates about racist acts, attitudes, and affiliations? We already mentioned the checks that we do in the background process, but in the initial interview and in the psychological examination, we also screen the applicants. The state of New Jersey does not allow us to use polygraphs. As far as my knowledge go, I don't think that ruling's ever been challenged. And then many people don't realize the first year that the applicant or the candidate is hired, they're on probation, and if they don't meet our standards, they could be released during that first year when they are evaluated. Next question. Explore how often police in every town punch, kick, or use force. The Montclair had 163 total uses of force. 38 was the force rate. 30.5 was NJ. Yeah.
So sorry, we're having a hard time hearing you. There's a lot of people in the chat room. Could you speak a little louder or in the microphone more? So sorry. I want to hear you.
Could you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Probably the most important part, because we're going to talk about the report from NJ.com that was provided with the use of force data. So that's probably the best time to listen. But just so you know, part of the question was, how can we achieve zero tolerance for undue force? And I just like to say before Captain O'Dowd answers, the agency has achieved zero tolerance for undue force. However, there's a difference between zero tolerance and zero incidents. We're always working to ensure zero incidents of undue force. And Dave will go over the actual, one of the questions on this. There's going to be a few on this report. Okay.
So part of that question was how many use of force occurred this year in Montclair. In 2020, we had 9 incidents so far that were self-reported by our officers. And of those 9 incidents, it resulted in the production of 22 use of force reports. So 22 separate forms from each officer that was involved in those 9 incidents. Of those 9 incidents, compliance holds were used in each incident. And just some examples would be an intoxicated person at a bar that was assaulting an employee, juvenile ingested narcotics, DWI arrest with a crash where the driver was combatant with the officer again at headquarters, overdose and involuntary transport to hospital for treatment, which resulted in filing of in the DWI arrest, for example, 9 of the use of force forms, 9 of those 22 forms were filed as a result of that incident. And the reason is you have a scene and then you have back at headquarters for processing. So if the person is resisting or is combative at the scene, and again at headquarters, we consider that to be 2 separate scenes. So we'll refile reports for each officer, even if an officer was at the scene and back at headquarters. So some of that accounts for the number of reports, use of force reports that we do file. And I'm going to go into that a little bit further. Compliance holds for juvenile emotionally disturbed at a doctor's office had to be restrained for their safety and then transported to crisis. And we still, even though it's not an arrest, we still do a use of force form because force was used to restrain that person to transport them. So they aren't all just arrests where force was used. It's actually involuntary transports to crisis or medical for the person's safety. And also want to say, in regards to what you're saying about zero tolerance for use of force, we, as an agency, our only standard regarding excessive force is zero tolerance. We do not tolerate it, we investigate it, and we're continually working to ensure 0 incidents through our rigorous hiring and background process, ensuring the best candidates with the correct temperament for this job are hired through training and also through training such as crisis intervention and our de-escalation training, and through our multifaceted oversight system includes multiple supervisory reviews of each use of force and each and every force incident, as well as an internal affairs review and chief's review. And there's oversight always by the Essex County Prosecutor's Office.
All right, the next question. In most police departments, the worst police-initiated violence is usually perpetrated by officers that have a history of abusive behavior and generally poor on-the-job performance. These are the officers that typically generate the most complaints in departmental investigations. In Montclair, what is your approach to dealing with these so-called bad apples?
Okay, in regards to the bad, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the bad apple question, every use of force is reviewed by multiple supervisors and then internal affairs to include the reports and any available video. If any actions that are in question are observed, the chief is notified and an internal affairs case is immediately open. If deemed excessive force, the Essex County Prosecutor's Office Internal Affairs Unit is immediately notified. If that's an excessive force incident, and the briefed on all materials that have been gathered up to that point. The Essex County Prosecutor's Office at that point may decide to take the case over completely themselves, or may monitor their case during its investigation here to fruition and then be briefed on the findings. So every excessive force allegation automatically triggers an immediate notification to Essex County Prosecutor's Office Professional Standards Office, and the same process as I just mentioned takes place. All use of force incidents are entered into our early warning system. So any combination of a pursuit, a use of force, a citizen complaint, or a firearm discharge can trigger an alert in that system. And these alerts are automatically reviewed by internal affairs, also the chiefs, and a detailed report containing a summary of that officer's history leading up to that alert are sent to the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, at which point they review the officer's history and all the incidents that led up to that alert to determine also as a second layer if there's a pattern that can be detected. And the next part of the question is what's the number of complaints for disciplinary action? There is no number of complaints for disciplinary action. Depending on the severity of the situation, one complaint or internal affairs investigation could certainly lead to criminal charges, not only discipline administratively, but criminal charges against that officer and also termination. So there's no set number of complaints that somebody gets to achieve. If a pattern is detected, immediate steps are taken, so that's if an alert goes off in the system, such as enhanced supervision, monitoring of their motor vehicle stop footage, where the supervisor will pull their footage and watch all of their traffic stops. Enhanced training, de-escalation being one example, and supervisory approval prior to taking any action, so long as it's not something in response to an imminent threat to somebody's safety. A majority of my position, just so everybody understands, in internal affairs involves observing the officers and the supervisors alike, detecting if there's any negative patterns and identifying possible training deficiencies or policy deficiencies that may need to be looked into and corrected. We're constantly looking at our policies and our training to determine if there's any enhancements that need to be made to adjust to what's happening, and also taking corrective action such as discipline if needed. Conducting internal investigations based on my observations as I do an investigation, or other supervisors or administrators' observations, as well as complaints, obviously, from citizens and from the public. And then tasked with recommending discipline to the chief based on the findings of that investigation, preparing criminal charges against the officer when warranted, and also making a case for termination when warranted against that officer.
All right. The other question with that report is, how do you respond to the finding from NJ Force report that a black person in Montclair is 490% more likely to have force used on them by police than a white person? Let's take this on.
Okay. So the use of force, NJ.com put together a report using data from all the agencies in New Jersey regarding use of force forms. So these are not our calculations, or this isn't our product. We did contribute to it by providing our use of force forms for that period, for that 5-year period, to them so they could put this report together. So I'll do my best to interpret their work and explain the statistics that they arrived at. So when I researched the methodology that they used in the force report, in their explanation of the report, they stated, at the very beginning, that this is a living, breathing, and imperfect database. And in their words, using force is a normal and necessary part of policing. This is not a database of police misconduct. A high number of uses of force does not necessarily indicate wrongdoing. They went on to say not everyone interprets the statewide guidelines for reporting force the same. And I'll explain that in a minute. It's very true. And we certainly are an agency where that applies to. Some departments or officers may be more rigorous about reporting, thus making it appear as though their numbers are higher. So it's use of force is a self-reporting system from the agencies, but also there's some interpretation, and I'm going to explain that. I'll tell you that we are an example of the most rigorous when it comes to reporting use of force forms. As I explained earlier, one incident yielding 9 forms because we considered that to be each a different scene. Many agencies probably would not do that. And then it would have yielded maybe 3 use of force forms as opposed to the 9 that we produced. So we err to the side of caution when it comes to reporting in use of force and force, as particularly in the area between physical contact and physical force. So I'll just explain that real quick. Physical contact is the routine procedural contact with a subject that's necessary just to effectively accomplish the law enforcement goal. So it could be guiding a subject by the arm to the agency vehicle. There's no resistance happening. There's no struggle. Holding their arm while they're being transported, handcuffing where they comply and are handcuffed with no resistance. So that's physical contact. Then the next step will be physical force. So that's contact with a subject beyond which is generally utilized to effect an arrest. So just a little bit beyond physical contact, and that's just used to overcome the subject's physical resistance to the application of the officer's authority. An example would be somebody who's not actively resisting, but when we're handcuffing, maybe locks their hands out at their sides or doesn't put their hands behind their back in a fashion where the handcuffs could be applied, and the officers have to take their arms and put their wrists together so that way the handcuffs could be safely applied. Now, we, as at Montclair PD, we look at that as being a use of force because we've taken that person's arms and we've moved them from the position they wanted them to be in to another position to apply handcuffs safely. We do a use of force form for that, and we do a use of force form for that or many agencies, I can't speak for them, but looking at the numbers, I feel like don't consider that to be something that would warrant a use of force form. Another example would be an emotionally disturbed person or a suicidal person who requires restraint for their safety to be transported to the hospital or to crisis for care. If we have to contain somebody, it's against their will if they're do not want to go to hospital, but have to for their own safety and aren't at that point capable of making the decision for themselves for their safety and care, then we do a use of force form on that. It's not an arrest, obviously, but we still do a form. So it accounts for some of the figures and some of the forms that we do submit. And those compliance holds we call, they do account for a large majority of our use of force reports. So that should explain at least the amount of reports. This report also claims that based on population, they say a Black person in Montclair is 490% more likely to have force used on them than a white person. So based on population, if you look at the U.S. Census for Montclair, the population states at last count 24% Black and 65.8% white. So this 490% statistic is based on our population and those numbers in Montclair. But Montclair is a unique place in that they may not be taking into account very diverse, vibrant, inviting place to shop and dine and seek entertainment and work. So on many nights during the week, all year long, it's not uncommon for Montclair's population to probably almost double. At nighttime, you drive down Bloomfield Avenue, you see there's people everywhere. The restaurants are full. Thankfully, it's great. But we attract visitors from all other parts of the county and state, even the tri-state areas. People come from New York City to Montclair to dine. So it's because of the excellent dining and the arts and entertainment. So we're not just responsible at that point when the town is that full to just police and look after the safety and well-being of our residents. Now we're looking after the safety and well-being of all our visitors. So when you take that number and the amount of people that are in town during those periods and you drop it over our population according to our census, it seems that 490 seems to possibly seek to include all of the interactions we have with our non-resident visitors as well as our residents placed over the top of our statistical population of residents. So to do an example, Glen Ridge, so ours was 490%. Glen Ridge, they're right next door. They don't have that vibrant downtown and the restaurants and the bars and everything that we have. They don't have the people coming into town. So mostly people in Glen Ridge are residents of Glen Ridge. Our number was 490%. Theirs is 2,498% in that same statistic. So Verona, right next door on the other side, Verona, the use of force report said that their percentage was non-applicable. I don't know what measure they used to achieve that. Orange on the other side is 76% less likely. So a complete shift to the other side. And East Orange, they're 238% more likely. So as you look around and you look at the populations and the breakdowns of the towns and the town, the amount of attraction for the town to bring in visitors, you see how those numbers fluctuate. And I think that helps to kind of understand the balance and how those numbers do flesh out. Some of the other stats that were in there that were discussed are brought up. So Montclair had 163 total uses of force during that 5-year period. So that averaged out to about 32.6 use of force incidents a year, right? So, and we're including those compliance holds and all the things that we discussed before. And that's and they said that 70 officers from this department used force during that 5-year period. So you take that 163, Orange, neighboring town, used 286 during that period versus our 163. That's total uses of force. Maplewood, 337, similar town. In makeup, we used 163. Bloomfield, 457, we used 163. And then on the same page on that report, incidents of use of force per 1,000 arrests. So that's just use of force, not based on population. Montclair, they had credit 38 use of force per 1,000 arrests, right? Orange is at 50.8, Bloomfield's at 47.4, and Maplewood's at 111, while we remain at 38.
So Chief,
Average incidents per officer in Montclair, use of force incidents during that period was 2.3. The state average is 4.1. So the state average is significantly higher than our average use of force per officer in Montclair. Compliance holds, as I mentioned earlier, I feel this statistic is going to demonstrate how rigorous our reporting truly is when it comes to use of force incidents here in Montclair. So compliance holds were utilized in 152 of our 163 reported use of force incidents over that 5-year period that was in this study. And compliance holds, as I explained, could be the person that needs to be transported to crisis or the hospital, somebody that's not capable at that moment of taking care of themselves or making decisions regarding their care, where we have to try and help them. So 152 out of 163. And the other question, finally, injuries. So during that 5-year period that they studied, 18.8% of Montclair subjects reported injury during a use of force incident versus 21.3% statewide. So we're below the statewide average again in that area. 9.2% of Montclair officers reported injury injury to officers during use of force versus 9.3 statewide. So we're right on par with officers injured.
So Chief.
All right. The next question was,
Chief, can you hear me?
And development is Montclair doing to help officers
Chief.
understand mental illness, neurological differences, and effective ways to identify, approach, speak with, treat, and detain if necessary?
Chief, can you hear me, Chief?
Best course that we go, although they cross over to other courses, would be the crisis intervention training. It's a 5-day, 40-hour course for law enforcement officers.
Chief Conforti.
Lecture, practical site visits, tabletop exercise focused on understanding de-escalation and reducing the need to use force. The course is taught by a multidisciplinary team consisting of law enforcement, medical, mental health, and legal professionals. And like I said, a lot of the trainings cross over to the same topics like de-escalation. The next
Chief, can you hear me, Chief?
I understand that all sworn officers receive de-escalation training, but I would like to know which training they receive in particular and how often are the officers retrained in de-escalation techniques. So the training that we
see if you could reach the Chief because he's not here.
I'll try. Chief?
Office and the Division of Criminal Justice. We also had officers attend an
Can you hear me?
in-person training going back 2 years ago where the whole department went. I believe that was mandated.
Chief.
And we're going to be planning on putting the virtual training through every year. But because the trainings are crossing over into different trainings, they're constantly getting something either on de-escalation or on crisis intervention. And like I said in the beginning, the prosecutor's office intends on putting guidance out on de-escalation in the near future, either with the policy.
Hear everybody else, but the chief can't hear us.
Chief, can you hear me, Chief? Chief, okay. we need to move on to the breakout rooms, but more importantly, there's a ton of items in the chat room about the report that you guys just went over. Okay. So there's definitely going to be a need to have a Zoom meeting just to deal with the questions in the chat room. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to end. Appreciate what you guys have done. We're going to now, Mr. Scott's going to transfer everybody into the breakout rooms.